the further and further you get into it, the easier it is to lose sight of what.
Walter Becker was the quiet force behind Steely Dan, the shadow to Donald Fagen's voice, the architect of grooves that hid as much as they revealed. Interviews were rare, stories scarce, and any hint of personal truth tightly sealed behind irony and understatement. Fans speculated, critics theorized, legends grew. And then, just before his untimely death, Walter Becker spoke. For the first time, he peeled back the layers of mystery surrounding his partnership with Donald Fagen. His words weren't just reflections on music. They were confessions, clarifications, and acknowledgments that changed everything we thought we knew about Steely Dan's heart and its most enigmatic minds. What did Walter reveal about Fagen, about their music, their friendship, and the private world they shared? Stay with us as we find out. Walter Becker wasn't the kind of musician who demanded the spotlight. If anything, he seemed allergic to it. While Donald Fagen carried the band's voice, smooth, sardonic, and unmistakable, Becker was the shadow, the force behind the precision, the man who made Steely Dan more than a band. Everyone knew the music, the albums, the hits that blurred jazz, rock, and pop into something timeless, but very few understood the mind that orchestrated it all. Becker didn't do interviews, didn't court controversy, didn't play the fame game. To the casual fan, he was a name in liner notes. To insiders, he was the perfectionist, the tempter of chaos, the partner who could make or break an arrangement with a single chord change. Born in 1950, Becker carried a quiet intensity that never quite fit in with the mainstream. He had a way of dissecting a song with surgical precision, breaking it apart and reassembling it so seamlessly that the casual listener never noticed the effort. But this brilliance came with a cost. Becker's mind was restless, analytical, and deeply skeptical. He approached music with the same rigor a mathematician approaches a theorem, and the results were extraordinary. Steely Dan's early hits, like Do It Again and Reelin' in the Years, weren't just catchy songs. They were meticulously engineered experiences, each note measured, each harmony calculated. Yet behind that mastery, there was a layer of mystery, a private life that no journalist could pierce, a silence Becker maintained like a fortress. Even within the band, Becker's intensity could be overwhelming. Fagen's charisma and Becker's technicality formed a yin and yang dynamic, but it was fragile. Stories circulated among studio musicians, Becker arriving at sessions with a scowl, rejecting takes, demanding perfection, refusing to compromise. He was a tyrant to some, a visionary to others. And while Fagen was often the public face, Becker's fingerprints were on every riff, every groove, every subtle harmonic twist that gave Steely Dan its signature sound. Their music was a labyrinth of complexity, and Becker was the architect. Outside the studio, Becker remained enigmatic. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, rarely quoted. Rumors abounded about his personal life, his habits, and his relationships, but he never confirmed them. Even the most persistent questions about his private world were met with deflection, irony, or silence. It wasn't arrogance, it was control. He understood the power of absence, the authority of mystery. Fans and journalists alike speculated endlessly, trying to understand the man who refused to explain himself, who let the music speak for him. Yet beneath the quiet genius lay tension. Becker and Fagen were inseparable professionally, but the partnership was complicated. Becker's perfectionism clashed with Fagen's wit, his cynicism sometimes at odds with Fagen's pragmatism. Behind closed doors, there were arguments, disagreements, and moments of raw honesty that the public never saw. For decades, the world only glimpsed the polished result, the albums, the charts, the Grammy wins. while the friction, the camaraderie, and the true depth of their connection remained hidden. Before his death, Becker finally decided to speak. Not to promote a new album, not to clarify a lyric, not to defend the band's reputation. He wanted to tell the story as he remembered it, to shed light on the man beside him for more than 40 years, to reveal the truths that had lived behind the music, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. What he shared wasn't just anecdotes, it was a revelation, a confession, a final chance to reshape the narrative. And when he spoke, the world realized just how much of Steely Dan's history had been encoded in silence. For a band obsessed with precision, the studio was both sanctuary and battlefield. Steely Dan's albums were never recorded live with a fixed lineup. Each instrument was chosen, tested, and perfected, often with dozens of session musicians. It was Becker who orchestrated this process, quietly pulling strings, demanding excellence, and leaving no note unexamined. The walls of these studios were witness to both genius and friction. Musicians remembered sessions that stretched into days, where Becker would reject take after take, insisting that even a single cymbal hit had to feel perfect. To outsiders, it might have seemed obsessive. To Becker, it was simply necessary. Fagen often joked about Becker's studio rigor, but behind the humor lay deep respect and sometimes exasperation. The two navigated this world together, a partnership balanced on subtle power dynamics. Becker's precision clashed with Fagen's melodic instincts. Fagen's lyrics danced with irony. Becker's arrangements held them in place. The tension created the magic, but it also bred stories of near mutiny among musicians, of tempers flaring in the fluorescent-lit rooms that smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and vinyl. Some remembered Becker pacing the floor, a cigarette dangling from his lips, murmuring about timing, phrasing, or an offbeat chord. Others noted how he could listen to a single measure of a bass line for hours, insisting it feel right before moving on. Studio walls also contained secrets. Becker was known to vanish during sessions, leaving Fagen and the musicians to speculate about his mood or intentions. Sometimes he was in the control room. Other times, he disappeared entirely, wandering the hallways of the studio, lost in thought. Those moments, Becker later admitted, were when he wrestled with both music and personal demons. He didn't talk much about the latter, but in the privacy of those walls, he processed his frustrations, regrets, and unspoken thoughts about Fagen, the band, and life itself. Becker's approach to music was almost surgical. If a track didn't meet his standards, he would start over, layering instrument by instrument until the sound matched the vision in his head. Critics lauded Steely Dan's perfectionism, praising the seamless blending of jazz, rock, and pop influences. Few understood that the perfection was Becker's insistence, his quiet dominance over the sound, his refusal to allow compromise. Behind every smooth groove was his shadow, every harmony coded with his meticulous care. And yet, for all his control, Becker was vulnerable. The pressure of maintaining excellence, the tension of his partnership with Fagen, and the weight of public expectation pressed heavily on him. For decades, he carried this silently, allowing only glimpses of his humanity through interviews, anecdotes, or the music itself. Only near the end of his life did he begin to peel back the layers, revealing the man behind the shadows and the studio walls, the truth that had been hidden in plain sight for more than 40 years. Even before Steely Dan became a household name, Becker and Fagen's relationship was complex. They met at Bard College, two ambitious, talented musicians who recognized something in each other but also sensed rivalry. Becker's sharp intellect clashed with Fagen's wit. Becker's obsession with structure collided with Fagen's improvisational tendencies. Early collaborations were a mix of sparks and friction, moments of brilliance tinged with tension that could have undone the partnership before it even began. Their first band experiments were fraught with ego and ambition. Becker, known for his rigorous standards, often criticized Fagen's arrangements, pushing him to refine lyrics or rework chords. Fagen, in turn, challenged Becker's musical choices, insisting that emotion and narrative sometimes mattered more than technical perfection. Friends who observed the duo noted a delicate balance, a push and pull that fueled their creativity, but also sowed seeds of resentment. When they began recording professionally, the stakes escalated. The pressure to succeed in the music industry revealed cracks in their dynamic. Becker's perfectionism, once endearing, became a source of friction. He insisted on multiple session musicians for a single track, dissected every measure, and demanded precision beyond what others thought possible. Fagen, accustomed to improvisation, sometimes bristled at these demands. Their interactions were a blend of camaraderie and conflict, and those tensions became part of the band's mystique. Rumors about disagreements, creative clashes, and personal spats circulated among insiders. Studio anecdotes hinted at late-night arguments over chord progressions or drum fills. Some session musicians swore Becker and Fagen barely spoke between takes, communicating instead through subtle cues or notes scribbled on sheet music. Behind the smooth sound that fans adored was a layer of complexity few understood, a partnership both symbiotic and volatile. Despite these challenges, Becker never wavered in his commitment to excellence. He understood that their combined talents could produce music unlike anything else, but only if he maintained control over the details. His hidden tensions with Fagen were less about rivalry and more about a shared obsession with perfection, an unspoken agreement that brilliance required conflict. And yet, decades later, Becker admitted that some of the weight he carried was personal, rooted in insecurities, disappointments, and the unspoken struggles that only Fagen might have understood. Those early tensions set the stage for the decades to come. A lifetime of collaboration, argument, compromise, and, ultimately, revelation. Becker's willingness to finally open up before his death allowed the world to glimpse the full scope of that relationship, the hidden struggles, and the extraordinary bond that made Steely Dan what it was. For decades, Walter Becker spoke in the language of music rather than words. Interviews were sparse, commentary guarded, and personal reflections nearly non-existent. Fans debated his moods, his habits, and his elusive persona, but Becker rarely clarified. Yet in the final months of his life, he decided to speak. Not to promote a project, not to correct a misquote, but to share truths he had carried silently for more than 40 years. What he revealed about Donald Fagen wasn't gossip, wasn't scandal. It was an intimate portrait of friendship, tension, and collaboration. It was the unvarnished story of two men whose brilliance was inseparable, yet whose personalities often collided. Becker described the partnership with Fagen as a constant negotiation between precision and expression. He spoke candidly about the arguments over arrangements, the debates over lyrics, the endless nights spent in studios perfecting a single track. "We fought," he said, voice measured, almost hesitant. "We fought because we cared, because neither of us would settle, because the music mattered more than our egos, though our egos made the fights inevitable." Those words were rare. Becker had rarely acknowledged conflict so openly. Fans who had assumed a serene, effortless genius behind the albums now understood that friction had been the engine driving Steely Dan's perfection. He also admitted the vulnerability he had concealed behind cynicism. Becker spoke of moments of self-doubt, of exhaustion, of the fear that the music might never match his vision. "Donald saw things differently," he explained. Sometimes I wanted control, and he pushed back. I hated losing arguments, but I hated compromises even more. That tension, it terrified me, but it also made everything stronger. The confession reframed decades of speculation. Becker had not been aloof out of arrogance or disdain. He had been fiercely protective of the integrity of their work. What stunned listeners most was the revelation of personal regard beneath the professional edge. Becker spoke with warmth, acknowledging Fagen's loyalty, his insight, and his unwavering commitment. He described Fagen not as a foil or a rival, but as a partner in the truest sense. The man who balanced Becker's darkness with humor, irony, and unflinching clarity. "We were better together than apart," Becker admitted. And sometimes, that truth was hard to say out loud because it was messy, complicated, human. Becker's final words also addressed the myths that had grown around them. For years, fans had speculated about feuds, jealousy, and hidden resentment. Becker laughed softly, a rare audible moment of levity, saying, "People love stories of conflict, but most of what you hear, half is exaggeration, the other half is projection. The reality is more complicated and, frankly, more interesting." His confession was not sensationalized. It was measured, reflective, and imbued with the subtle irony that marked his personality. By opening up, Becker reshaped the narrative of Steely Dan. His words reminded the world that genius is not effortless, that creativity is forged in tension, and that the man behind the perfectionism was both brilliant and deeply human. For the first time, fans heard Becker's voice not through notes, chords, or lyrics, but directly, in his own measured reflections. It was a confession that transformed perception, showing that behind the immaculate sound lay decades of struggle, devotion, and love for a friend whose presence had defined his life. Walter Becker's reflections didn't just illuminate his own character, they cast a new light on Donald Fagen. For years, Fagen had been the visible face of Steely Dan, the witty, sardonic narrator whose lyrics and melodies defined the band's style. But Becker revealed that Fagen's brilliance was inseparable from their partnership, a delicate balance of respect, rivalry, and shared obsession. "Donald was fearless in ways I couldn't be," Becker said. "He could take risks with lyrics, phrasing, melodies, and I was there to make sure those risks didn't collapse under their own weight. He trusted me to hold the structure while he explored the chaos. Every improvisation, every ironic lyric, every sophisticated chord became a negotiation between Becker's discipline and Fagen's creativity." Becker also acknowledged the personal vulnerabilities behind the music. Their friendship endured betrayals, misunderstandings, and silent resentments. Tensions sometimes escalated to near breakdowns, leaving Becker to question if the partnership could survive. "We fought, we walked away, we returned," he explained. "Each time, we learned more about each other and about ourselves." He challenged the myth of roles, Fagen as orchestrator, Becker as shadow genius. "People want to assign roles," he said, "but the truth is that we were both architects. I was the shadow, yes, but without him, the shadow has no form, and without me, the form collapses." Perhaps most strikingly, Becker humanized Fagen. Beyond irony and detachment, Fagen showed patience, empathy, and quiet resilience. "Donald could be stubborn, yes," Becker admitted, but he also had a generosity of spirit. He knew when to push, when to let go, and when to simply listen. That's why we survived and thrived. Becker reframed Steely Dan's story. The music was not the product of one genius, but a synthesis of two intertwined minds. Every note combined discipline and freedom, every lyric jest and confession, proving that the story behind the music was as compelling as the music itself. Steely Dan's reputation in the music industry was legendary. Critics lauded their sophistication, musicians revered their technical mastery, and fans celebrated their polished recordings. Yet, few truly understood the men behind the albums. To most outsiders, Walter Becker was an enigma, a perfectionist hidden in shadows, a reluctant public figure. But his final words shattered decades of misconception, offering clarity on a partnership the industry had long misread. Becker revealed how the business side of music often conflicted with their artistic vision. Record labels pressured them for hits, demanded compromises, and dismissed experimentation. Becker's meticulous approach, often mistaken for stubbornness, was in fact a defense mechanism. "They didn't get it," he confessed. "They thought we were difficult. We were difficult because we cared. Every note mattered. Every word mattered. And if they didn't see that, they weren't hearing the music." He described the industry's tendency to reduce their complex arrangements into simple sound bites, to value marketability over mastery. Session musicians often complained about Becker's insistence on perfection, but he knew that each track had to survive both scrutiny and time. The market might reward trends, but Becker sought something enduring. He spoke candidly about moments when labels threatened to replace him or Fagen, moments when they doubted the viability of Steely Dan's meticulous process. Yet each time, Becker and Fagen pushed back, refusing to compromise. Becker's confession also highlighted a paradox. While the industry admired Steely Dan's sophistication, it often misunderstood their motivations. Critics praised their cleverness, their polish, their irony, but rarely recognized the emotional depth and personal stakes embedded in the music. "People thought it was clever for cleverness's sake," Becker explained. "But it was never just clever. It was honest, brutally honest, sometimes painfully so. And that honesty didn't always align with what executives wanted." He also discussed the isolation that came with brilliance. Steely Dan's obsessive recording processes, their relentless refinement, and their refusal to follow industry trends set them apart. But it also alienated them. Becker admitted that he often felt misunderstood, misrepresented, and overlooked. Yet, he never regretted the rigor, the friction, or the countless hours in studios. The results, he knew, spoke louder than any interview or accolade ever could. In his final reflections, Becker positioned the industry as both audience and adversary. They had admired his work, copied it, and critiqued it, but they had never fully grasped the human story behind the precision. By sharing these insights, Becker invited listeners to see beyond charts, sales figures, and headlines, to understand the dedication, conflict, and genius that had fueled Steely Dan for decades. And in doing so, he reclaimed the narrative, proving that the music was inseparable from the men who created it. For outsiders, Steely Dan's studio sessions were legendary, tales of perfectionism, meticulous arrangements, and hours lost to nuance. In his final reflections, Walter Becker revealed something far more human: the battles, both subtle and fierce, that shaped the music. These weren't casual disagreements. They were disputes over the very soul of each song, sometimes lasting hours or days. For Becker, these clashes were essential, the friction necessary to create timeless work. He recalled late nights in the studio, Fagen at the piano, Becker listening intently, a single misplaced note sparking tension. Donald would try something, and I'd push back. I'd say, "No, that phrasing won't land," Becker said. And he'd argue, sometimes louder than I thought humanly possible. But the argument itself was the music forming, like iron sharpened by fire. Outsiders assumed effortless brilliance. Becker revealed the sweat, frustration, and unglamorous labor behind the sound. The confessions went deeper than music. Becker admitted moments of exhaustion, self-doubt, and despair. "There were nights I wanted to walk out," he said. "I thought maybe I wasn't good enough. But Donald, in his own way, pulled me back. He would just sit there, nod, and play. And somehow, that told me it was worth continuing." Becker also explained his role in shaping Fagen's work. While Fagen crafted sardonic lyrics and melodies, Becker's interventions, subtle adjustments, harmonic suggestions, structural guidance were crucial. "I wasn't just saying no," he said. "I was ensuring the music would last. I had to protect it from mistakes, compromises, even our own egos." Ultimately, Becker reframed Steely Dan's perfectionism as collaboration born of conflict. "We fought," he said, "because we cared, and because the fight was how we made it perfect." The music fans adored was inseparable from the struggles behind it, a testament to genius forged through friction, trust, and relentless devotion. Walter Becker's final studio sessions were never publicized. Unlike typical album releases, these recordings carried no fanfare, no press blitz, and no promotional tour. In his last months, Becker poured himself into one final project with Donald Fagen, a culmination of decades of collaboration, conflict, and mutual understanding. For Becker, it was more than music. It was a legacy, a testament to what they had built together, and a personal farewell to a world that had revered him yet never fully known him. He described these sessions as intimate, almost sacred. "There were no cameras, no producers, no deadlines," he said. "It was just Donald and me, and the music. Everything we'd learned over 40 years came together. We argued, we laughed, we remembered the old days, and we recorded. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once." The revelation painted a vivid picture of two men, seasoned by decades of experience, yet still driven by the obsessive pursuit of perfection that had defined their early career. Becker spoke with unusual candor about the creative process. They revisited old songs, reimagined arrangements, and experimented with new techniques. Minute adjustments, a note held longer, a chord inverted, a rhythm subtly shifted, transformed the music from technical brilliance to emotional resonance. "Every little choice mattered," he said. "It's what separates music that's remembered from music that's forgotten." In these final recordings, the intensity of their craft was palpable, a distillation of everything Steely Dan had represented: sophistication, precision, and collaboration. He also revealed his emotional investment. Moments of doubt and reflection surfaced as he acknowledged the fragility of life and legacy. "I knew time was short," he said. "I wanted to leave something behind that mattered, something true. It wasn't about fame or money, it was about integrity, and about showing the world what we could do together, one last time." For fans, this reframed Becker's perfectionism as devotion, a final act of love for music and for Fagen. The sessions themselves mirrored Becker's life, meticulous, collaborative, and emotionally resonant. Subtle exchanges with Fagen, moments of unspoken communication, and the ease of working with someone who instinctively understood his methods created a rare musical intimacy. "Donald and I could finish each other's ideas," he said. "Not in a cliché way, in a real, musical way. That's rare. That's why it worked." For Becker, the studio was a place of honesty, a dialogue between life and art, and a space to leave a lasting mark as a perfectionist, collaborator, and friend. Walter Becker's death in 2017 left a void in the music world, but his final confessions reshaped how fans and critics understand Steely Dan. His words revealed that the band's genius was not born from effortless talent, but from decades of relentless effort, negotiation, and mutual respect. Becker's reflections reframed every album, every lyric, and every chord progression as part of a living dialogue between two creative minds, rather than a one-sided display of musical brilliance. Becker emphasized that the public perception of Fagen as the driving force was incomplete. He credited Fagen's insight, patience, and creativity, while also highlighting his own role as a meticulous guardian of musical integrity. "People think they know Donald," Becker said, "but they don't. And they think they know me. They don't either. What they see is the result of years of struggle, argument, laughter, and compromise." These words invited fans to re-examine the music with fresh ears, to listen for the interplay between precision and freedom, tension and resolution, discipline and inspiration. The legacy, Becker insisted, was personal as much as professional. Steely Dan was not just a band, but a record of a lifelong friendship, a chronicle of human struggle, and a testament to what two driven individuals could achieve together. He acknowledged that fame, critical acclaim, and accolades were fleeting. What mattered most was the honesty of their work, the depth of their collaboration, and the enduring impact of the music itself. Critics and historians quickly took note. Becker's confessions prompted a wave of re-evaluation. Albums were reassessed, interviews reread, and biographies rewritten. Fans gained a deeper appreciation not just for the technical brilliance, but for the humanity embedded in every song. Becker's words revealed a man who was fiercely protective of his art, deeply loyal to his friend, and profoundly aware of the fragile beauty of life and creativity. Ultimately, Becker's final revelations transformed Steely Dan's narrative. The music, once seen as immaculate yet distant, now felt intimate and alive, a product of negotiation, devotion, and the complex chemistry between two extraordinary artists. His confessions ensured that the story behind the songs would never be forgotten, and that the legacy of Walter Becker and Donald Fagen would be understood not just in notes and chords, but in the depth of a friendship and a collaboration that defined a generation. Walter Becker's final words did more than illuminate Steely Dan's music. They revealed the private world behind the curtain, a realm fans had only glimpsed through interviews, liner notes, and cryptic lyrics. In his reflections, Becker stripped away the mystique, exposing the vulnerabilities, conflicts, and intimate truths that had defined decades of collaboration with Donald Fagen. For the first time, listeners could understand not just what Steely Dan sounded like, but why it sounded that way. Becker recounted the delicate balance of personality and genius that underpinned their work. "People think Donald and I were always in sync," he said, tinged with fondness and irony. "The truth is, we fought constantly, over phrasing, tempo, lyrics, arrangements, even the placement of a symbol. But those fights weren't destructive. They were our way of communicating, of making the music better. Every song carries the trace of those battles, the fingerprints of our disagreements and compromises." This reframed the band's legendary perfectionism. It was not cold or mechanical, but born of dialogue, tension, and mutual respect. Perhaps the deepest revelation was Becker's acknowledgement of Fagen's and his own humanity. Behind the sardonic lyrics and meticulous studio work were moments of fear, exhaustion, and doubt. "Donald carried the weight," Becker said, "but I was there to challenge him, to push him, to make sure he didn't settle. It was symbiosis. That's how we survived, how we created, how we endured." Steely Dan's genius, he revealed, was never the product of a single mind. It was fragile, collaborative, and profoundly human. Becker also reflected on the personal cost of a life behind the scenes, choosing music over fame, privacy over publicity. "We were outsiders," he admitted. People wanted stories, scandals, access. We didn't give it. The music had to speak for us. But that silence hid pain, human struggle. I wanted listeners to hear the music without distractions, without judgment. Every cryptic lyric, ironic twist, and layered harmony became not just artistry, but a shield, conveying truths while protecting private lives. Finally, Becker spoke of his enduring respect and affection for Fagen. We argued, we laughed, we sometimes drove each other insane, but at the end of the day, there was trust. There was love for the music and for each other. That's what it all comes down to. The music would have been nothing without that bond. Steely Dan, he made clear, was the sum of two extraordinary minds, intertwined and inseparable. Walter Becker's final words reshaped Steely Dan's legacy. They were not untouchable icons defined by precision alone. They were flawed, brilliant humans whose genius sprang from friendship, struggle, and devotion. Behind every note lies the heartbeat of two men who gave everything to their craft. The curtain has lifted, and it changes everything we thought we knew. If decades of quiet can finally be broken, should we accept it as closure, or question why it stayed hidden for so long? Before he passed, Walter Becker opened up about Donald Fagen, but the impact of his words depends on how we choose to hear them. Before the music fades and the years rewrite the story, remember, some truths are meant to be discovered only once. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.